Our next speaker is Jenna Coplin, my co-convener for this event. She is an archaeologist working in cultural resource management and completing her PhD at the Graduate Center at CUNY. Her focus is on shifting relationships between suburban and urban communities, including intersections of co-residence, labor, race, and ethnicity to better understand how Long Islanders engage the national economy emerging in the 19th century. And her paper, if I can find it, is entitled The Cold Spring Harbor Whaling Company, Financing the Deep Sea Hunters.
Hi, I also want to thank the Gardner Foundation and the Humanities Institute for hosting us today. It's really a fantastic opportunity for us all to get together. I usually learn as much from audience members as fellow panelists and these kinds of things, so I'm really looking forward to your questions later on. I also want to thank Jennifer, I have to start my timer because I'm timing myself, sorry, for taking this idea and running with it. If any of you guys know Jennifer, she's really good at this, so be careful what ideas you pose to her. But I also want to thank her for mentoring me through this process. A lot of this was a new experience for me because of my background, and so that's been an unbelievable experience. I want to thank some of the contributors to the issue that are here but are not going to be up here, like Naomi and Diane. I saw you earlier. There you are. She's contributing a fabulous piece to the journal, and she's been a huge help to me personally doing my own research. So visit the Cold Spring Harbor Whaling Museum often. They're awesome. Also, I have to thank Stephen Sanfilippo. Where are you? For those of you who know him, it will be no surprise. For those of you who don't know him, you should get to know him. Thank you for making this fun. This whole process has been fun. So, I also need to point out one thing and clarify something. The work that I'm presenting today is the result of the Cuffey Fellowship, program in part, which funds the study of minorities in American maritime history. It's a great funding program, so if any of you are interested in doing research, check them out. It's Mystic. Wonderful organization. And I also want to clarify, I'm not faculty at GC, at the Graduate Center, I'm a student. So I just wanted to be clear about that. All right, I'm a historical archaeologist by training and new to history as a standalone discipline. The work that I'm presenting here and in the journal was supposed to be background research into the labor market for African Americans in and around Cold Spring Harbor during the 1840s. Rather than standalone research, as these projects sometimes do, it has taken on a life of its own. So that's what I'm going to be talking about here and in the journal. I'm interested in the 1830s and 40s because it's a period of tremendous change, especially economic change. And I'm particularly interested in the opportunities that this offered Long Islanders and how it impacted local communities. I do have an underlying assumption that Long Islanders in general interact with New York and Connecticut markets in a way that's driven by an entrepreneurial spirit that's unique to Long Island. It manifests itself in different ways, but that's kind of the underlying assumption. In other words, I feel like the local identities that still survive here on Long Island were in part derived from people retaining traditional community-based relationships while simultaneously taking advantage of the things that are going on in New York, particularly in New York City. So it's a unique combination. Long Island's engagement with these changes was inherently local, and it's reflected in our communities. As the example of Cold Spring Harbor's identity as a whaling community and home to industry simultaneously still today. So I thought that by looking at the Cold Spring Harbor Whaling Company history, what I wanted to do was learn about the company's transition from a whaling community as whaling died out and changing into this later transition. So I'm focusing specifically on the finances associated with the Cold Spring Harbor Company. To refer to the history of whaling in the region under the moniker of the Cold Spring Harbor Whaling Company is really a misnomer. The normal history kind of goes, John H. and Walter R. Jones, brothers, founded the Cold Spring Harbor Whaling Company in 1838. They owned 9 ships, sailed 44 voyages, we're generally successful. That part stands true. And all these voyages were out of Cold Spring Harbor. Really, to subsume all of the activities that are going on in Cold Spring Harbor's whaling history under these points, it really neglects the structure of the business, and it downplays the importance of traditional relationships and its overall success. This is a very unique hybrid company. John and Walter were definitely not alone. Rather than forming a company in the strictest of modern senses, the business was much more like a hybrid of a traditional whaling venture, like what John talks about, and an incorporated venture like we see coming into popularity in the 1830s. Not all the ships sailed out of Cold Spring Harbor. They sailed out of Sag Harbor. They sailed out of New York. There were good reasons for that. I'll go into that in the article. But so it was a Cold Spring Harbor-based venture, and certainly the Jones brothers were at the front of it in many ways, but it was more a collective community event that took advantage of all the resources that they could muster to make it a success. In the end, all of these details contributed to its ongoing success, allowing it to survive for more than 25 years. It doesn't sound like a lot in comparison to Sag Harbor, maybe, but it is an extended history. And considering all the things that these folks did wrong or went into blind, it's pretty amazing. It's a pretty amazing entrepreneurial endeavor. So the 30s in general saw a really big wave of incorporation with the whaling business, differing from traditional organizations like the ventures that John, as I said, speaks so clearly about on Long Island. People were utilizing the changes in the law allowing whaling forms to become incorporated identities. These kind of entities, these served to limit investors' risk, and it separated the board of directors from those actually aboard ships. Good, bad. Firms were incorporated by acts of state legislature, and the terms of each act reflect the changing attitudes of lawmakers over time who were balancing the needs of the creditors, who wanted to make sure they were going to get repaid if the company went belly up, and the investors, who wanted to make sure that they weren't on the hook for all the debts that the directors could accrue under the company's name. So the risks were real. The risks of incorporated entities were very real. And this is really evinced by the Staten Island Ferry Company, whose act of incorporation was passed within days of the Cold Spring Harbor act of incorporation. And they sought to take advantage of the waterfront property. The company built a warehouse, a processing plant. They bought a vessel and sailed at least one voyage. At least one, maybe two. But in the end, the directors were also the directors for the local bank directly across the street. And this local bank was also the company's main source of capital. Community members expressed their concern publicly during the incorporation process, but the company was incorporated in 1838, just like the Cold Spring Harbor Whaling Company. But history suggests that the community's concerns were well laid, because by 1867, the company was in court and ordered to pay $15,000. Apparently, they were dealing in the purchase, sale, and transfer of bonds rather than the business of whale fishery. In fact, the warehouse had burnt down in 1842 and the property had been sold. So, there were concerns about what people were doing with these bills of incorporation. The Jones brothers were up to something completely different. Okay, so let's go back to what they were up to. The structure of the Cold Spring Harbor Whaling Company, it didn't incorporate all 9 of their ships. The company actually only owned 2 ships. And those 2 ships actually went out sailing as more traditional ventures prior to the company being incorporated. So this was really a true hybrid organization. So even as the act is passed in 1838, the company can't start business. And so during that time, they're still whaling. But the company can't start business because they haven't raised enough base capital. It wasn't until 1840, when the act was revised downward, the capital requirement was revised downward, that they actually transferred to do these 2 ships under the ownership of the company. And in doing that, they had to do some great accounting, which was really useful for us and you know, timely for today. So in order to buy the Tuscarora and the Monmouth, they had to buy it from the old subscribers. So these subscribers were converted to shareholders, and some of the debt specifically associated with lay due from the Tuscarora were settled in the conversion. And this resulted in a very detailed list of old subscribers and now stockholders in the company. So one of the things that this points out, this transition points out, is that even within this conversion to a corporate entity, the Jones brothers, their shareholders were family members. Their shareholders were neighbors, farmers who were neighbors. Their shareholders was one of the captains that sailed for them twice. So it wasn't like they were going out and seeking incorporation outside of their sphere. This was a traditional organization. But at the time, a traditional venture had 9, 11 people involved as investors, as main investors. They had 50. Between the two ships, they had 50 investors. Some were investing in one, the Tuscarora, some invested in the Monmouth, some invested in both. So when they converted that to stock, their first 50 stockholders are all the same as these original subscribers. So it may be that they were using this tool of incorporation to kind of manage the fact that they had all these investors and hoped that something in these rules of incorporation might help them negotiate this. But it's unclear if they actually got what they wanted out of it, because the company's dissolved in 1851. The Tuscarora, by that point, is sold off because it's damaged, but the Monmouth continues to sail out of Cold Spring Harbor. So they probably purchased it in some fashion out from underneath the corporation, sold it as the corporation was dissolved in 1851, and continued to sail on. No pun intended. So in 1840, the investors named Jones comprised only 16% of the total number of investors in the company. Together, they owned only 22% of the stock. The Hewitts, who were close, many of whom were close relatives, married into the family, and some of whom provided the property transfers that actually formed the base for the Cold Spring Harbor Whaling Company. They added an additional 10% to the total and an additional 5% to the outstanding stock. Together, the extended family, including members of the Jones, Hewlett, Cole, Gardner, and Gracie families, own 31% of the Cold Spring Harbor Whaling Company. So although the Jones brothers were active in outfitting and acting as agents and working on collecting monies for stock sales and all of this, they certainly were joined by a whole mess of other people who weren't their relatives. But most of whom were local Cold Spring Harbor folks. This is definitely more of a community affair, this hybrid use. So, edit that out for time's sake. So a gentleman named Hilt in 2006 did a study of these incorporated whaling firms, and his conclusion for the Journal of Law and Economics, and if anyone wants the reference, I can give it to them. Excuse me. And basically what he did was he looked at more than 800 voyages sailed by these incorporated companies and looked at the commonalities between them. And his end conclusions were that they were all dead by the 1840s and that very few were successful. And some of the key factors that he attributed that to were the fact that these were usually newcomers, which the Jones brothers were. There's no evidence that they had any participation in the whaling business, although Walter was involved in marine insurance, but there's no indication he was a man of the sea in any way. He was very successful in marine insurance. Sorry, that these were all new, non-specialized ports for whaling, so costs were higher, things were more difficult to procure. That was certainly true of Cold Spring Harbor. There's no indication that whaling ships went out of Cold Spring Harbor before this, at least not that I have found yet. I always hold that out. And they often had difficulties the Jones brothers themselves often had difficulties acquiring experienced captains and experienced crew. They were complaining all the time that this was the case. And in fact, 11 out of those 44 voyages were captained by individuals who this was either their first time out as captain or their second time out. So they had a lot of things going against them. But they had a lot of things going for them, and some of them were housed in this entrepreneurial spirit of Long Islanders. They took all of their old businesses that were now failing, these woolen mills that used to produce the finest fabrics, state award-winning fabrics, and turned them into factories that made coarse fabrics for sailors. They took the cooper shop that was now underutilized for transporting flour and converted that to supplying their whaling business. One of the main investors in their corporation in the end turns out to be a dry goods salesman who's an associate of Walter's from New York City. So they're establishing longer-term relationships that look like traditional relationships, even though they are not necessarily one's neighbor. Okay. So initially, my interest was focused on African American households and whaling in the region and the impact that this incredible venture had on those households. You're gonna have to read the article because I'm close on time. But enough to say that much less of an impact than one would expect. Whether that ties to their inability to draw labor because of their own inexperience or other factors is something that is yet to be seen. However, what this venture certainly did was it certainly had a durable impact on beyond the business of whaling. By mid-century, the shift from agriculture to manufacturing was occurring in many places, including Cold Spring Harbor. Between 1850 and 1870, wage labor jobs jumped 82% in Oyster Bay. Non-population statistics for industry show that the transition from piecework to machines like sewing machines, rolling machines, and lathes shows an increase in these. But by the 1870s, this industry includes specialists, including a machine repair person. So this all suggests the investment of capital, generally at a smaller scale. A large number of the investors in the company were smaller investors, 5, 10 shares of stock. So it may have also been that they were seeking this incorporation to protect those investors who were also their neighbors and protect their investment in the long run from the fluctuations within the whaling business. Certainly some of that money seems to have made it into the community, but tracing that has been a little bit more difficult, and that's the research ahead, I think, is tracing that money through that capital as the whaling business dies out and these other industries in Cold Spring Harbor rise up. So I think I'm gonna stop there.